All right, let's start. Hi, I'm Harish and I lead platforms and community at AngelHack, and welcome to the Learn with AngelHack series where we bring experts from various technologies to talk about some of the interesting and emerging topics. And today our topic is building apps and components using Bit.dev, and we have Seiji, who's a Microsoft MVP and also community lead at Angular Philippines, and he's also an AngelHack Ambassador, and he's going to walk through how micro frontends are emerging these days to help people build apps using components. With that, Seiji, over to you.
Yep. Hi, Harish. Good morning or good afternoon. So yeah, thank you for inviting me and having me here in AngelHack, and it's a pleasure to share my knowledge with everyone. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'll share my screen now and start.
Yep.
Okay. I guess you can all now see
Yeah.
my screen, right? Yeah. Thank you for that one, Harish. So yeah, thank you, Harish, for that introduction, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, Angel Hack, and thank you for joining us, even though it's a Sunday afternoon. I know this is your rest day, but yeah, you're still willing to learn about development. So yeah, our topic for today is about Bit.dev. So Bit.dev, we are now building components or front ends or micro front ends, but we're gonna use a very useful tool to make our development of micro front ends maintainable at the same time, more fun, and it's easier for us to build and at the same time analyze all of our components. Okay, so this is very uninteresting because this is one of the new technologies right now that we are using in terms of developing micro frontends. Okay, so yeah, I was introduced a while ago, but I'll just introduce myself again in a shorter way. So I'm CJ. I'm a currently senior developer at Codev. So I'm mostly involved in Microsoft products, so specifically in Outlook. Then also, yeah, I'm a Microsoft MVP. So yeah, I'm been MVP for 2 years already. So what I do is I share products with Microsoft, especially in the side of development, and I'm also an Auth0 ambassador. So discuss about security and especially how we use Auth0. And also, I'm a community lead at Angular Philippines. So yeah, just like AngelHack, I also organize events and seminars that is not really related to Angular, but also in web development. And yeah, I'm also an author, so I'm currently working on a book right now that is related to Angular and Java. Yep. And so this is just one of my talks in my previous years. So I've been speaking around, I guess, 4 years already. So I've been to several talks in the community, in local meetups, and even in several conferences. So right now in the pandemic, I've been speaking in online. So yeah, it's my talks are recorded. So it's not just about development. Sometimes I talk about career stuffs. So yeah, if you want to learn about what you want to expect in terms of development, so yeah, I've also talked about that. Yeah, so that's basically just about me, and let's go ahead of Bit.dev. Okay, so yeah, what we're going to discuss today is all about components. So how we build components, so how we develop it, and at the same time how we deal with it. So yeah, the once I go with this topic, you will always hear about components. So components slash micro frontends. So you will hear the term micro frontends right nowadays because this is the trend nowadays in terms of developing applications rather than monolithic applications. So micro frontends, it's now really the trend because it helps the developers a lot in terms of developing their applications. But before we go directly into micro frontends or components in the front end, so we will just discuss some of it. So what is it? Okay, so micro frontend. Before we discuss this part, so where does micro frontend application or where does the where does the concept of micro frontend came from? So it does not necessarily came from web application or front end applications itself. So we're going to discuss first what's the origin of micro frontends. So before micro frontends was born, it was really microservices, and it's not really intended for the front end, but for the back end itself. So yeah, micro means small. So we are building or developing component or our applications into small parts or small pieces. Then micro web services was first used by Dr. Peter Rogers. So it was called micro web services because it was intended for the web and specifically for the backend. So microservices, it's existing since 2005 already. So it was intentionally used for services or APIs rather than front-end applications. Okay, so as I have said a while ago, so it was used for services and APIs, and it was intended to solve the monolithic maintainability dilemma. So yeah, as web developers, when we are starting to learn web applications. So we are not really going through building or developing micro frontends because this is actually the most advanced part. But we are actually practicing ourselves in building monolithic applications. So monolithic applications, if you know the word monolithic means it's just a one big chunk of code. So it's just one application. So you build all your code, you bake all your code in just one repository. So we don't build our applications into smaller pieces. Yeah, so that's the trend. That's our first step is to learn web applications using monolithic way. But in terms of building our applications in a monolithic way, there is actually a dilemma. So one of the dilemma here is how to maintain it and how to develop it properly. Sometimes monolithic introduces several issues or even bugs because we are developing our applications into just one code. So this causes a lot of issues in terms of maintainability. So yeah, with that kind of issue, many companies have already adapted to the microservices. So one of the well-known companies is Netflix. So they are using monolithic micro frontend architecture and microservice architecture rather, and even Amazon. So they're also using microservices in this case. So they're not just using microservices, but they're also using micro frontend. So both on front end and back end. So yeah, after that adaptation, so many companies have also adapted that kind of architecture. So the micro frontend and microservices because they have seen the main advantages, which is the maintainability side of your application. Okay, so microservices. So what does it really solve? So yeah, I've explained the monolithic dilemma. So that's just one picture, that's just one side of the issue. So first is the monolithic architecture itself. So that's the common thing we do. So yeah, this is the first thing you learn, how to build applications in a monolithic or in a big chunk of application. So yeah, as I have said, the maintainability dilemma. So the common effect of a monolithic architecture is it can cause really a lot of bugs, especially if it's an enterprise project. Because if I'm a developer, for example, we are 10 developers in a team. So there's a tendency that we have a lot of changes in our code. So yeah, there's a possibility that I can disrupt the code of another developer, and even though it's dependent from my code, so that's the issue in terms of building a monolithic architecture. So yeah, for example, we have a big application and it has a service one, a service two, and a service three. So we have three services. So it's actually served in a single server. It's deployed in a single server, and we are pushing it in a repository. So our monolithic architecture or our monolithic application, it's just lying in a single repository and deployed in a single server. So that's what we do in a monolithic architecture. So it's just really a big chunk of app where we bake all of our code. So if we are a big we are a big team of developers, So we are placing all of our code in just a big chunk of single repository or code base. Okay, so let's just enumerate one by one the monolithic issue. So yeah, we know now it's a single code base. So it's a single repository or a big chunk of code. So these are the five actually. For me, this is the five main or major issues that we can encounter in monolithic architecture. So the first one is debugging. So yeah, think of it that your application is a big enterprise project. So sometimes it's like finding a nail in the sea. So when you debug an error or when you find an issue, so it's a really big project. So it's really a pain in your head to find a single error. And sometimes, for example, you're a new developer, so it will be really a hard time for you to debug or to find an error in your code when you're having a monolithic architecture. So that's one of the biggest dilemma when you are dealing with a monolithic application. Then second one is the maintainability. So actually this is related to the debugging part. So when you deal with a big chunk or a big monolithic architecture and application, so maintainability will be really a hard time for you. So especially if you have different parts of the application, and sometimes it will really get into your head that, hey, where do I start? This is really a big code. So maintainability is really sometimes really an issue for a monolithic app. Then next is the tight coupling. So yeah, what do you mean by tight coupling? So when you create a monolithic architecture or monolithic application, sometimes we tend to create parts of the application that are really dependent from each other. So if you create an application with a really tight dependency, so this will be also an effect for you to have a hard time maintaining the application. So yeah, tight coupling is also an issue when it comes to monolithic architecture. So it affects also the maintainability and the debugging side of your app. Then yeah, fourth one is deployment and start time. So it also affects the performance. Why? Because you have a big chunk of code. And the fifth one is the less reusability. So yeah, actually this reusability, um, because it's actually the tight coupling also. So you have major dependencies between your code in your application. So this is really a problem actually in monolithic architecture, that all of your code is very dependent with each other. So this will also cause you a boilerplate codes and a repetitive codes rather. So yeah, it's really less reusable. So it will also tend your code to get bigger and bigger. Okay. So if you have, for example, a code change, this is an example scenario. So if, for example, I'm the developer, I have a change in code. So it has, I didn't notice that it will cause an error for all the application. Then I've pushed the code in our application or in our monolithic app, then all codes are affected. So that's one problem. So me, I'm just a single developer, and I've disrupted the overall code, so the all application, and that's just a single nail that I'm pushing in my application. So that's really a big problem in a monolithic way. Okay, so let's just have a meme right here. So we don't want that to happen with us. So we don't like to be Sheldon in this way. So we don't want to waste our time debugging an application, and after that we would know that this is just a single, or this is just a very simple error. So we don't want that to happen. Okay. So with this monolithic issue that I have explained, so what's the solution for this one? So instead of creating your monolithic or your application into a monolithic architecture, so why not you can define or divide your application into smaller fine components. So it's what you call the single repository responsibility principle. So it's like a separation of concerns. So instead of building your application or baking your code into a single application, so why not divide them into their responsibility? So for example, we have several services in our backend. So let's divide it into 4 services based on their responsibility. Okay, so microservices actually it evolve from time to time. So there are actually different patterns right now. Take note, guys, I'm not talking about the front end, so I'm talking about the back end right now. We are just starting on where does front end or where does micro front end started. So it actually uh, originated from a microservice, which is the backend part. So yeah, I'm discussing this to show you the concepts that they did in terms of developing my services into a micro or small pieces. So yeah, um, it evolved from time to time, the microservices. So there are different patterns that they have come up to in terms of the building their backend or building their REST APIs. So this is just one of the common patterns. So first is we have the client. So the client is the front end or the one consuming the data from the REST API. And we have an API gateway. So the API gateway is like the bridge between the front end and the back end to call the services. Then instead of creating your application into a monolithic or your services into a monolithic service, so let's divide it into several pieces. So for example, here we divided it into 4 services, and these are not just services. So these are total different projects. So for example, you're using .NET. So these are 4 separated .NET projects. And for that one also, since they are separated projects or separated services, so they have also their separated storage or separated database. And for them to communicate with each other, so for sometimes service 1 needs data from service 2, so we can create an orchestration in between them. So the orchestration serves as their means of communication. So orchestration can be in a form of event bus. So one service can communicate to another service. Okay. So another design. So this is just the example of the design pattern. So this is a more specific one. So the orchestration, it's now using event bus. So the event bus is the communication between the services. So yeah, as I have said a while ago that some services, for example, service 1 needs a data from service 2. So they need the event bus to communicate with that service. So for example, if you're familiar with .NET, so they're using Kafka or RabbitMQ for the event bus. So that's one way we can create microservices in our application. Okay, yeah, so the topic here is Bit.dev. It's about micro front end. So I know you're not interested about learning the topics or learning about the patterns of microservice. So I just want you to know where does the micro front end came from. So yeah, um, let's now proceed to the micro front ends part. So yeah, we've learned the microservices. So before there was micro front end, there was microservices. And how did they come up with the micro front end? So they they have invented or they have founded the microservice architecture or the microservice pattern. So they've come up with the plan. Hey, why don't we also apply this microservice in the front end or in the client application? So who came up with the idea of micro front end? So it's from around 2016. So quite new um, compared to microservices. So it's around just 2016. So it's from ThoughtWorks Technology Radar. Then, as I have said, so the concepts of microservice, they come up to apply it on the client side or the front-end application. So it's really flexible nowadays. So it's not just for back-end, the micro concepts. So it's also now for the client. So the main goal here is to develop a web app into a composition of features which are owned by independent teams. So the previous teams before microservice was born, so they're having issues in terms of the maintainability, the debugging, and even the tight coupling in terms of developing their backend. So they have come up with the microservice. So they're actually experiencing the same dilemma in micro front ends. So yeah, they have come up with the plan of developing in the code or your client into a small pieces. And they also want to create different teams or independent teams in terms of building your client. So micro frontends is really the way of achieving this kind of situation. So yeah, the idea is not really that new. So it has a lot in common with self-contained systems. So I will not explain self-contained systems right now, but if you want to learn about what is self-contained systems, so you can visit microfrontends.org. So yeah, the micro frontends concept, it's also resembling the idea of self-contained systems. Okay, so actually this is just um, the structure of your team in terms of how they build the product or how they build the project. So in this case, this is a monolithic structure, except for the microservices part. So you can see here that the microservices, it's actually the monolithic part. So the first one is the monolith, the monolith architecture. So it's the shop team. So you can see that all of the team is baked into one. So we are not dividing it. So what happens here is all the teams are working into one single repository. Then um, this is a monolithic one. So this is actually discussing the MVC. So this, we are not developing the application into a REST API and single page application, but this is more of an MVC, for example, a Java Spring. So this is the monolith. Then the next one is the front and back. So when the REST APIs have emerged and the single page applications like Angular and React and Vue have emerged, so um, it's really a big step in technology in terms of developing web application. So what happened there is the teams is divided into two. So the first one is the backend or the DevOps team. So they're handling the deployments, the development of the REST APIs, and the second team is the front-end team. So they're handling the single page applications or the code that is for the client side. So that's the Angular and React. So that's the second feature. This is the second structure. Then the third one is the microservices. So this is around 2005. So yeah, we have already divided in the team into two. So why not divide the backend also into parts or into different teams? So in the microservices, we divide the team into different backend development team also. So this is just one common way. So they are dividing it into their responsibility. So for example, the first team is responsible for the product service. The second team is responsible for their our reco service and so on. So this is the microservice part. So the back end team is now more complex because it's divided into different responsibilities. But in this case, our front end is not yet divided. So it still consists of a single team developing the client application. So the micro frontends. So once we apply the micro frontends in that particular structure, so we can see that the front end and the back end is also now divided into several teams. So since the back end, so if we go back to the other part, so we have the product, the reco, the basket, and the payment. So the front end also have their own teams also, and it's aligned with the back end development team. So the mission here is simple. So it's not just the back end that is divided into their responsibility, but also the front end. So it's now more complex, and at the same time, uh, we know the responsibility of each development team. Okay. So yeah, as you can see a while ago that we have the design pattern or the application architecture from the microservice. Now we have combined the pattern of a micro front end with the microservice. So this part is actually the same from the architecture that I have shown you a while ago. But on this part, so instead of just having a single client application, so we are also now um, dividing our application or our client front-end application into several parts. So this is the first component, this is the second, and the third, and the so on. And for example, one component needs to communicate with other component. So same with the microservice. We are using orchestration in terms of communication between the components. And yeah, it's the pattern actually. So we can see that our components is um, divided or it's deployed in the different servers. So that's also one way on how we can use micro frontends or how we can establish micro frontends in the application. Okay, so yeah, we have discussed what's the concept of micro frontends. So now is what are the goals of building micro frontends? So yeah, first is technology agnostic. So what do you mean by technology agnostic? So micro frontends, it doesn't mean that you have to be coupled in a single technology. Yeah. So for example, if you're building an Angular application, so it's a monolithic way, for example. So you will need to use Angular or Angular framework. So you cannot use other frameworks or other JavaScript frameworks because this is limited to a single framework. But when you use micro frontends, so it's agnostic. So you can build different components or several components into different frameworks. So we can actually use Angular and React at the same time. So that's the main advantage or the main goal of micro frontend. Then next is the team code isolation. So that the structure that I've explained that I explained a while ago, it explains this one. So we can isolate the team depending on their responsibility. And yeah, established team prefixes. Actually, this is quite the same. So we know the responsibility of each team, and we also lose the idea of tight coupling. So every team is not really dependent from each other. Okay. So yeah, there are really different types of how to implement micro frontends. So it's not just Bit.dev. So, but we're gonna focus on that one. But I'll show you also the different ways on how we can uh, implement micro frontend. So the first one is iframes. You might be shocked, but iframe is considered micro frontend. So why? Because it's like you're embedding a single server or a single website into a single page. So, but in iframe, it's not really that secure, but yeah, it's still considered a micro frontend. But we are not recommending this to create micro frontends using iframes. And next, yeah. So web components. This is not just actually Angular elements, but yeah, you can also use the React components. But this is almost the same with Lit. You can use Angular elements in terms of creating micro frontends. Then Angular libraries. So the NPM, not just Angular, but also React. So it's generally NPM libraries. So that's micro front ends. Then monorepos. So if you're familiar with NX, so NX is a great way to create your monorepos. So this is considered micro frontend since you're it's a single repo, but you are building or developing your application into separate parts or separate pieces. So it's also a great way on creating your micro frontends. Then customized orchestrators. So this is kind of complicated. Then the last is the Bit.dev that we will discuss today. So we will focus on the Bit.dev and how to create components or micro frontends. Okay. So yeah, for example, we have several components. So this is the question actually. So what does Bit.dev usually do, or what's its use? Why do we need to use it? So for example, I have a component of a button, I have a component of a table, I have a component of a search. So from what we know, if you are using Angular or React, so we can install that using npm, so the registry or the node package registry. But somehow it's just a registry for us. So we don't have a collaboration tool. We don't have like a collection of components. So we have, for example, material or bootstrap, but we still need to set up the whole library. So what if we want to pull out a single component, or what we have why for example we want to have a single album of components that we only want to pull single components. So in that case, npm and yarn will not do the work for you. Okay, so let's imagine that we have a cloud that we can collaborate, we can document. At the same time, we can have a single CI/CD for each component. So it's like an album of components where we can pull a single components at the same time the documentation. So this is where we put our buttons, our tables, and search. And yeah, so we have the document, we have the collaboration tool, we have the CI/CD. And at the same time, developers can connect simultaneously with that cloud. So for example, we have 3 developers and we want to have a versioning for that cloud. So npm and yarn, I think that's not enough because it's just a registry. So what would solve or what would provide this kind of feature? So that in that case, Bit.dev is the solution. So that's the main importance of Bit.dev in developing your application. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's the summary of what is Bit.dev, but let's just specify or let's just deep dive into what does Bit.dev really do. Okay, so it's a collaborative platform for hosting UI components using different frameworks. So yeah, it's as I've said a while ago, so you're collecting your components, placing it into a cloud to have its own documentation, to have its own collaboration at the same time, to have its own CI/CD. So it's like a component, but it's acting like a single project. So we want that to happen. Bit.dev wants that to happen. Okay. So if you are comparing Bit.dev into the real world existing applications, so it's like let's think of it a component library. It's like a music CD album. So npm does that, right? So for example, a material UI or a material UI kit or a bootstrap kit. So it's a CD album, but in order for us to download that, or for example to to organize that into several categories and to have a well documentation. So think of it that Bit.dev is the Spotify or the iTunes for that UI components. So it's actually the cloud. So it's an accessible cloud for us to use the components at the same time to create a CI/CD for that one. Okay, so yeah, if you visit bit.dev, you can see this. I'm not sure if it's really that clear, but you will see a lot of components that are being hosted by different communities. Okay. So now we know what is bit.dev. So why we would want to use bit.dev. So these are just actually the advantages that you will notice in terms of using Bit.dev. So the first one is the no boilerplate setup. So later on, I will show you in the demo. So how can we set up Bit.dev? So it's actually easy. So you just have to create a CLI for that one. But I'll show you later on a specific or the step-by-step on how to create it. So it's like a project. It's like an Angular or React project. So it generates a package.json file for every component. So as I have said a while ago, the components, it's acting like a single project. So each component has its own package.json. So it also offers reusable dev environments. So the dev environments, you can use that depending on the needs or the requirements for your components or your application. Okay. Then the next one is the Semver components. So what does Semver components means? So you can actually combine different components based on their different versions. So you can have actually, for example, you have a button, you have a search. So you have a version 1 of button, then you have a version 2 of your search. So you can combine depending on the requirements of your components in a single application. So that's a full control of what you want to use or what version do you want to use for each parts of your app. Then next one is the segmenting components. So I will show you also what does this means. But segmenting or the segmentation, meaning that the components are organized in your cloud. So it's easier for us to search what are the components that we need. At the same time, we can also generate the component labels, and it has smart filters. So it's Bit.dev offers several filters. So for example, I want to find a component. So I can also filter rather than the name of the component, but I can also filter the dependencies, the size of the component. So for example, I only want a component that has a 10 kilobyte or of size. So I can also place that in our search. So it will display all the components that have only a 10 KB size. And yeah, the dependencies also and the context. So in my example below, I have, for example, my workspace. So we have a search bar in this case. So we can search the name, the dependencies, and the component size, and many more filters that it offers. Okay. Then yeah, the documentation is out of your hand. So Bit.dev, actually for me personally, this is one of the greatest advantage of Bit.dev. Why? Because it actually provides documentation once you deploy or once you push or export your application, your component in the cloud. So yeah, you will write it, but it provides formatting tools. It's like a README in GitHub. So once you deploy it, so it's not just about the example or the composition, but you will also have a documentation on your component. So it's easier for you to know how to use it, especially if someone will use your components. So it's actually a one-stop shop for a component library. And yeah, we will see later on how we can document our components. Okay. So yeah, I think I'm mentioning Bit.cloud several times already. So this is also this is the features. So now I'll discuss this is just some of the features of Bit. But if you go through on the documentation of Bit, it has many features. But right now I'll discuss you the several features that or the common features that we will use in developing components using Bit. So the first one, I guess, it's the Bit.cloud. So this is the first one because this is the feature that we will be mostly using in terms of developing a Bit component. So this is where the components are deployed, rendered, documented, and can also be imported from your app to your applications rather. So yeah, this is the cloud. So this is like the Spotify of your components. So this is where you deploy. This is where you will see the composition, the documentation, and even the history of what are the changes that you created on your component. So Bit.cloud is it's the Spotify of your components. So yeah, um, you will see an example of this page later in this utilities. So this is the example of the Bit.cloud. So there are several communities already that is placing their components in the cloud. Okay. Um, so we have the cloud. So we also need our local resources. So before going through the cloud, so we have our own workspace. So our development workspace is where you create your components, use existing components, and yeah, even modify existing components and export your changes in your components. So to create your workspace, it's just simple. So it's just a simple command of bit init, and you will have your own workspace already. So if you are learning Angular, if you're a developer of Angular React, it's just the same. So it provides a CLI for you to scaffold your Bit project. So it doesn't need you to create sophisticated configuration, and you will have your Bit workspace on the fly. So this is where you will bake all your components or your code in your components. Okay, so the workspace actually provides templates that we can use for easy setup. So as I mentioned a while ago, You can use Angular project, you can use a React component, you can use a Node module in creating your components. So it actually provides a templates for you to generate that components depending on the framework. So you can list all the templates. So you just have to execute the command bit templates. Then the next is if you want to create now a workspace with that template, so we just have to create, you just have to execute the command bit new. So that's the template, place the template name and the workspace name. So simple as that. And if you want to create, for example, this is your template or your workspace. So I want to have a React template. So it's bit new React and the name of your workspace name. So in this case, in my example, the name of my workspace is my React workspace. So yeah, simple as that on creating your workspace. Okay, now for the components, it can be, as I have said, it can be a Node module, a React components, or Angular modules. So we have already created our workspace, so we can now create our components. So in order for us to create a component, so it's just bit create the template. So it's React. For example, we want to create a React component. So it's just we just have to define the template, then the path. So I want to name my component as my dash button, and it's under a UI scope. So yeah, after you've created that component, you will also see here the files that will be created or scaffold once you execute the command. So we have the index.ts, so that's the main component. The my dash button, so this is the actual the implementation. This is the code of the component. Then the spec is just for unit tests. So the composition meaning is an example of how we would use that particular component. So for example, a specific developer consumed your component. So the button composition shows on how to use it. So it's part of the documentation actually. And yeah, the button.docs. So this is the main documentation of your component. So this actually displays the properties. For example, your app component has a name property or an event emitter. So that displays the documentation or the description or the definition of that properties. Okay. So yeah, components are really powerful. So they're not just really components. So they in order for us to identify or to easy analyze the created or the developed components, so it also contains several descriptions or several definitions that will be really helpful for the developers. So the first one, it's the history. So it contains the history of the source code. So it is really transparent for us to know what are the changes for a specific component. So yeah, we can analyze it, what's the current status or what's the current situation. Then the dependencies also, we can also know what are the different dependencies that is the component using. So we know the things that that specific component require, since bit is also transparent for that. And when you also want to have a deeper or a specific information about the component, so we can actually execute a command named bit show. So it will also display the different or the specific details of that specific component. So we can see here in my slide. So I'm not sure if it's clear enough. So you can see there the files, the package name, the environment the React is used, that component is using, the scope where we should find the component, and other descriptions that uh, other descriptions that might be useful for us in that specific component. Okay, so these are just some actually of the actions that we can use or we can apply in a component. So inspect, so we can check the logs and the history. So that's just bit inspect the component name. So we can actually see what are the changes that has been done with a specific component. Then a snap. So a snap is like a snapshot of that specific component. So this is not for release purposes, but for rather for collaboration purposes. So for example, you want to make a copy of a specific component, and before releasing it, or before creating a release version, so you might want to change first the snapshot of the component to have a simulation of your changes. Then the tag, so it's same as the snap, but the tag is more of a release version. So you will make a copy but a different release version already. So that's the responsibility of the tag. So the tag is the counterpart of the snap. Okay. Then next, we have discussed the workspace now and the components of the bit. So now we will discuss about the scope. So the scope is just a definition of who is the owner of the component. So it just defines the ownership. Then there's actually two different scope. So that's the local scope and that's the remote scope. So the remote scope is pertaining to the collaboration server. So we have actually think of it as a playground or an environment where the teams can collaborate. So that's what scope is referring to. Then scopes, it doesn't, as I have said, it's not technology agnostic. So it's a technology agnostic rather. So it's not limited to one application. So for example, you are creating a component that is created out of React. So it's not limited to a single framework. So you can have a scope with different components that is built with different frameworks. So it can be a React, an Angular, or a Node module. So um, you can create a local scope. So actually this pertains to the workspace also. So it's a bit init dash the dash dash bear. So the dash dash bear, this means that you're not using any templates. So this is just a very simple workspace for you. Then if you want to start the local scope server, so um, you have to execute the command bit start. Okay, so yeah, that's are just some of the features of Bit. So if you want to uh, explore or discover the other features of Bit.dev, so yeah, you can go to their documentation. But the three main features that I have discussed a while ago, so these are like the base or the most common things that you need to know before starting Bit. So if you want to install your Bit CLI, so you just have to execute the command npx at teambit slash bvm install. So yeah, you must have also your node installed. I have not included that anymore, but if you want to ask, so yes, you should install node.js also because it's dealing with npm and npx. And yeah, in this case, this will install the bit CLI. You will have a new environment variable on your local. It's named bit. Then after that one, you can now create your new workspace. So for example, I want to create a workspace with a template of React. So it's bit new React, and the name is angel-hack. Then the default scope is bit.org.experience. So that's how we can create a scope or a workspace in our local. Okay. Then next, if you have already created successfully your workspace, so let's just list the templates. So we can actually list the templates. So what to know or what are the available templates we can use in creating components. So after that, if we are decided, for example, you want to create a React component, so we can execute the command bit create React, then UI/my button. So this will create a single component on your workspace. Okay, and for example, you're not yet ready to export your application, or you're not yet ready to push your application in your BitCloud. So you can actually test it using your local scope or your local server. So you can just have to execute the command bit that start. Yeah. So yeah, this is just some of the commands. So you have not seen it visually. So yeah, let's just have a simple demo for our bit. So here in the bit website. So let's just go again. So if, in order for you to access bit, so it's bit.dev, then yeah, you should create your account. So you actually can use your GitHub if you have one, or your Google account. So in this case, let's just, I'm already logged in, but yeah, if you don't have your account yet, you should create it. So in this case, we're already on the bit.cloud. So in bit.cloud, the first thing you need to do is you should create your new scope. I'll just move this one here. Okay, so you can create your new scope under a specific theme. So for example, yeah, I just create my scope here in the bit demo dash CG. So I guess I'll name my scope AngelHack. Then I'll set it into a public scope. Okay. So you can also invite your team with that one, but I'll just skip that for now. Let's just wait for our scope or our bit cloud to initialize. Okay, so there. So we have our own scope already on our project. So that's just simple. It's simple as that. So we can actually create your scope on the fly. So, but in this case, we can see that our components is still empty. So what we are going to do here is we want to create our local scope. Okay, so in our VS Code or any environment or any editors that you want to use, it's okay. But currently, I am using Bitscope. So what's the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new local scope. So if you remember, we have a command bit templates. So once you execute that command, you will see all of our available templates. So it's React Native. So these are the one of the available templates right now that we can use in Bit. So what we want to do is create a new workspace using React. So it's Bit new React. So let's create our workspace named AngelHack CG. Then we want to have our default scope. Let's name it. Oops. To the theme, sorry, but let's just name it experience that AngelHack, I guess. AngelHack Live. Let's just name like that. So guys, please feel to interrupt me if my screen is not that clear. So yeah, I'm not sure if the writings or the code is clear on your monitor or your screen. Okay, so let's just wait for our workspace. So yeah, so we can see that our workspace or our local workspace is now already scaffold. So let's just open that. Okay, so right now we can see in our workspace that we have also our the folders or the files that we need. So it's actually the same in creating your React project, your Angular project. So there are just some additional folders or files that we need to learn or to see. So the first one is the bitmap. So we can see here the bitmap file. So this is actually the schema uh, of what Bit is using. So Bit uses this file to know the next version that we are creating. So for example, we want to create version 2 for a specific button. So bitmap is updated automatically when we want to increment the version of a specific component. Then we also have the workspace JSON. So this is actually the main configuration of bitmap. So we can actually see here the default scope that we have entered a while ago. So other configurations like the icon, the directory, and even the dependencies. So think of the workspace as the package.json. So the package.json also holds the dependencies in a single project, right? So think of it also as the package.json in Bit. So you can also see the dependencies that we are using in a specific Bit project. So yeah, we have our own Bit workspace. So for example, let's create a component. So we want to create a React component, then let's place it under a workspace named UI or a folder named UI. Then let's, for example, let's want to name it AngelHack button. Okay, so we have already created our UI button or AngelHack button. So you can see here that it created um, a folder named AngelHack Live. So where does AngelHack Live came from? So as you remember, we have a default scope of experience that AngelHack Live. So this is the one we are using, the scope that we are using. So under that one, we have the bit CLI, it scaffold different files. So we can see here that we have the AngelHack button. So this file below, this is actually the actual implementation. So this is where we want to change the implementation of the code. So for example, we want to create a button here. Yeah. So this is where we change the implementation of the button. Then the spec, I'm not going to explain that because that's just for unit test. Then the documentation, so it has its own documentation already. So if you change the implementation, so yeah, it's 100%, you will change also the docs. So this will be also displayed in our Bit.dev cloud. And at the same time, you also have the composition. So the composition, as I have explained a while ago, so this displays the actual usage of the component. So the AngelHack button, for example, you want to use it. So this is the simple way on how we can use the AngelHack button. So this is actually for the users itself to know how can they use the component. So it's actually part of the documentation itself. Yeah. So for example, you want already to create a release version of this component. So for example, hey, I'm good with my implementation. So what we want to do is tag the component. So for example, you want to tag the AngelHack button. So it's under UI. So angel-hack button. Then we want to place it as 1.0 version. Then let's create a message for it. So my first bit button. Okay. So what this command will do is it will actually edit the bitmap, and it will tag that the button is ready for release. So it will have a version 1 on its description or definition. So you can see here that it's also actually testing the UI or the component. So if it sees any problems in your implementation, so it will not successfully tag the component. So we can see here in the bitmap. So let's just see the bitmap here. So yeah, as you can see here that it has a tag already. So it has the AngelHack button. So it has a version 1. And this will be used by Bit.cloud to identify that, hey, I've tagged this component and we want to create a release version for it. So yeah, our UI or our component hack button is ready for exporting. So we will just want to set up our cloud. So this default scope, we can actually use this. So it's bit demo cg.angelhack. So we can actually use this default scope and copy on our workspace JSON. So under the workspace JSON C, so we want to copy paste the default scope. So in my previous command, so we can actually also directly set this scope. But in this case, I just want you to know where to place the default scope if your default scope is different from the bit.cloud. So right now, we want to export that one. So this is actually the last part of how we will deploy our bit component. So you can see that we have successfully um, exported our component in our bit cloud. So let's see the cloud again. So yeah, you can see in my cloud that we have already the AngelHack button. So you will see here visually what's the use of the different files. So the AngelHack button docs, the composition, and even the specs. So in this case, the package name, it's the at experience. The at experience is the main scope. Then the bit demo, Angel.AngelHack UI. So that's the default scope for our Angel Hack button. So in this case, let's try the composition. It's kind of not loading. Yeah. So let's just wait for our scope to initialize. There. So let's just have this example for, right now. So this case, we can see the hack button. So we can see here that our component usage. So this is coming from the docs itself. So we have the definitions of how we can use that specific component and how can we render that and what's the output. So yeah, we have it's really transparent for us on how we will use this specific component. Then the composition. So this is just the basic example of the output of the component. So let's just have the other um, bit that I have created. Okay, there. So since we have less time, so I'll just show you the different definitions or the different descriptions that you will see. So in this case, yeah, this is the output of the component. Then the dependencies, I will show you later on how this works. So for example, the hack button, it uses another component as a dependency. So you will have a transparent look on what are the other dependencies that it uses. Then also, it also runs the test, so the spec. So it's, you can see it's just like a one-stop shop for your component. So yeah, you can see here that everything is in place, and it's not just a registry of components, but we can also see useful descript or definitions or useful information for your component. So for example, we want to increment the version of the component. So for example, this one, the hello world again. So yeah, I'll just change it again. So test change again for this component. So what we're just going to do is just tag that again. So right now we have a version of for our UI. So let's just say let's make it into version 2. So my first bit button will be another or a second version. Hmm. Okay. Okay. So after tagging this one, and let's just wait for our components to be tagged. Then let's export it again. So after exporting the hack button, so we have now the version 2. And you can see in our bitmap that it's also modified. So we have a version 2 of our hack button. Then we can see here, let's just refresh. So we can see here that our version is also changed. So yeah, we have different versions already. So you can see the last versions that I've created. So you can also see my changes here in our overview. So this is actually the implementation. So the test change again for this component, and yeah, in the composition you can also see my changes. And yeah, other than that, you can also check the logs or the changes for a specific version. And excuse me. So we can also compare a specific version. So for example, I'm comparing one version 1.03 for version 2. So you can actually also check that what are the different changes. So it's really a good way of finding or analyzing the changes in the button. So it will be transparent for the developers on the recent changes or the recent updates on a component. So this will actually avoid some dependency issues, at the same time some incompatibility issues on your component. So now the last part is the dependencies. So right now we can see that our hack button is dependent on the um, welcome component. So how did that happen? So in this case, we have the hack button. So the hack button is actually dependent to the my welcome. So how did that happen? So what I did here is I just installed the at bit demo Seiji my workspace UI welcome. So for that to be installed, so we can go again to the cloud. So this is the component that where is the AngelHack button dependent to. So how to install this is we're just going to use also the bit CLI. So we're gonna have this package name and install it. Okay. Sorry about that. We forgot the install there. Yeah. So in this case, it's already installed. So it's on the entry. But if it's not installed, so it will be added on your workspace.json. So we can see here in my project that the Bit demo CG Microservice UI is already installed. So this is the version 1 of our component. So let's just try to remove this line. Then let's try to create this a version 3. There. So we have our version 3. So our hack button does not depend on the my welcome component already. So we will see that our dependency tree will change. Okay. So right now, let's use the bit export again. Okay. So we can see in our cloud that let's try to check again. So our hack button does not depend on the bit my welcome component. So when you see the dependencies, so we can see here that we don't have the my welcome dependencies already. So oops, sorry, this is the wrong project. That's the wrong one. It's the hack button. So the 3. My internet is kind of slowing, but yeah. So we are already on version 3. So we can see that we don't have a dependency already on the my welcome. So it's actually automated. So you don't have to set up anything for the dependency tree to reflect. Bit automatically identifies the dependency of a single component. So in version 3, you don't have any dependencies, but in version 2, so your version 2 hack button has dependencies on the welcome. So yeah, that's just one of the basic um, features, or just some of the basic features of Bit.dev. So in this case, since we don't have much time, I'm using CLI in terms of tagging, in terms of creating dependencies and exporting our components. But in Bit.cloud, we can actually use GitHub or GitHub Actions in creating our CI/CD. So CI/CD will be the one responsible for tagging or creating or exporting your components or creating new versions for your components. So you don't have to, um, you will not have to export or using CLI commands in exporting and um, tagging your components. And it's actually the standard way in terms of in the industry. So yeah, this is just a very basic example for you to start on creating components using Bit.cloud. Okay, so I guess that's for my very simple demo. So what have we learned in my topic for today? So first is, yeah, we created our own workspace for Bit.cloud. Then next is we have created a simple component using a React template. So if you want to learn more, you can, if you don't want to use React especially, you can also create components using Angular and even Node modules. But in my case, I've just created a React component. Then next is we have also created a local remote scope in Bit.cloud. Then we also visualize the dependencies in our component. And since we don't have much time, I did not discuss this, but in the documentation of Bit.cloud, so they have an example of how to create your own CI/CD in terms of tagging, in terms of exporting and installing the Bit in your components. Okay, yeah, so that's it for my talk. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you learned about the basics of Bit. And yeah, happy coding, everyone. So if you have questions, I guess this is the time for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Seiji, for the very insightful session. I think taking us through what monolithic apps mean and also clearly differentiating how components help us build apps better
Yeah,
is definitely insightful. Thank you again for joining us today. Since there are no questions, we'll probably end this here.
sure. Yeah, thank you.
Cheers. Thanks again. We'll see you on another talk really soon. Seiji, hope you'll come back for another session soon.
Yeah, thank you also, Harish, for having me. Yeah, it's a great session.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll
Yep,
see you soon.
thank you, everyone.